Good afternoon. I'm glad that you all still have the energy to make it through all the way to 1,500 hours here at the last piece of this. So what we have today is a panel of our great leaders that are going to talk about really what Army Aviation's integration into this whole aspect of decisive action really is. And so so my credentials are, which aren't many. I mean, my decisive action was being in the Pentagon on the E-ring, trying to dodge bullets and all of that kind of stuff. What you have here is a panel of great leaders, all experienced war fighters, and they're all struggling with, as we've gone through 15 years of war, as the Army's thought about what it is that we want an Army to do. I mean, General Perkins talked about this yesterday, if you were there, in terms of the Army operating concept. Unified land operations, where basically you want to seize, retain, and then exploit gains on land. Army Aviation's enabling capability into the larger Army force to do that. And if you want to talk about decisive action, you want to talk about those things that you combine, your capabilities that you can combine to conduct simultaneous offense, defense, stability, and support to civil authorities type operations. And so what I do want to do for the few that are out there, I think this is great because they probably have a lot to say about the impact of what the Army's thinking and what it's written in its doctrine right now, and how we're trying to shift a bit from doing what was described when you want to describe the Army's capabilities applied to decisive action in terms of wide area security to combined arms maneuver. It's what they're grappling with their formations in trying to make that happen at their level. And so first, Hank Taylor, commander of the Aviation Brigade in Korea, the 2nd Infantry Division. Mike Hertzendorf commands the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Mac McCurry is up at 10th Mountain Division in the Aviation Brigade there, soon to come into the building to do a little work. Bob Alt commanded 4th ID's Aviation Brigade. If you want to ask a good doctrine question, he's the guy, because General Lundy's been whipping his butt for the last 2 years in terms of, basically refreshing describing what we want to do and what the aviation force wants to do as part of that. J. Ray Davis is his background, again, down at Eastover, South Carolina in the 151st, and now he is the senior guy for the Army National Guard in their Aviation and Safety Division. And then Brian Chivers is down at the Joint Readiness Training Center as the senior observer controller for the aviation team, commanded 282 at Fort Bragg in the 82nd Airborne Division. They are steeped in experience, multiple combat deployments, so hopefully they do have some things to say about the impact of what the Army's thinking, how it's organized on decisive action. Hank,
Okay, I'll start. I'll put a little flavor about Korea, because we do that. And so when you talk about decisive action operations, what I've seen is a lot of people start trying to overthink what that really is. And for us, in my experience in 2 years of commanding the CAB in Korea, where our mission, if you're watching CNN, and I think today is a very real mission with the threat to the north, is getting my officers, my warrant officers, my NCOs who have been fighting the coin fight for the last 15 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then taking those experiences of still conducting attack, reconnaissance, air assault, medevac. So our basic core missions are still the same, but is now really how we apply that, whether it is in offense or defense operations, really for us in Korea. And then the second point I'll make is in what size formations that we do those operations win. So a lot of our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan were executed on the attack reconnaissance side with attack weapons teams or scout weapons teams, formations of 2 aircraft together. We're now, as we talk about massing combat power and effects on the battlefield to destroy large formations of tanks, armor, and infantry, we had to make sure that we retrain our forces that have been doing an excellent job of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan to understand now that we have to destroy a lot larger formations. So really that's what I'll start off with as the piece, the stage setter there is the transition from COIN to understand what decisive action operations really are and not to try to overthink it, and then getting to people to understand our flight formations now are a lot larger.
Hey, thanks, Hank. I guess I overthought the problem then. So to me, I sort of had to think, what is decisive action? What's Army Aviation's mission statement? It's, integrate, synchronize, employ Army Aviation as a combined arms maneuver element. Last 14 years have been a coin fight. Well, what's the next 14 or 15 years going to look like? And it's probably not going to look like the last 15. Weapons are increasing greatly. So I sort of thought through, what are the capabilities, training, and leadership we need for a decisive action fight 15 years from now. And what is that fight going to look like? I don't know. It's going to be hybrid. I call it messy. Different enemy actors, armies with a counter-terrorist or a terrorism flavor to criminal nature, weapons, everywhere from RPGs, PKMs, AK-47s up to, high-end radar frequency or IR that are going to be proliferated and changed. So we're going to have a very complex enemy. We're going to have a very complex series of weapons. And then, arguably a very complex geopolitical situation. We see it now with the effects of CIVCAS and what the governments want to do, what our partner nations are willing to do. So you take all of that into a future fight that's decisive action, and I think it's going to be very messy. So not to get too much into the capabilities, but here as we look around all the technologies, we're going to have to think through what capabilities do we need on our platforms. They're going to enable us to fight in that ambiguous, complex environment, to move data around. How do we train for it? And then what kind of leadership? And so I guess on the training, I think we employ Army Aviation very well. And maybe it's a 2 and 4 ship, but okay, maybe we just need to employ it at the company team level. And I think, largely in the 160th, we fight company teams. And I think that's a pretty good level, 4 to 6 to 8 ships. And if you make those 4 to 8 ship packages modular, you could just add on. So maybe a lot of the training really needs to happen at the battalion level, where you're synchronizing, you're integrating, you're doing that planning, you're working with the joint force. And so I think from the training aspect, we just need to get our aviators out there doing the repetitions, and the battalions doing a lot of that really hard synchronization and training for the enablers. And then finally, leadership. It's all going to come down to the soldiers. And I think we have to continue to look to ways to execute mission command and really build that trust with the junior leaders. Let them get out there. Let them make the mistakes. It's not easy to do, but we have to do that. And we have to grow those generations of leaders to be able to make those decisions, in those company team environments. That's all I have to say about that.
Mac McCurry, 10th Cab. Largely over the last couple years, we've been focused on GRF-type responsibilities, rapid deployment, expeditionary living, expeditionary fixing and fighting, which we had not been doing for the last 15 years or so. And so more of a task force organization, working with BCTs, working with my brother on my right here. I currently have a task force that's aligned with SOCOM, and doing those kinds of things. And I think largely I want to capitalize on two things that Hank and Mike said. One is, what level do we want to talk about integration? So when we go to JRTC, which I think Brian will talk about in a little bit here, we're embedding aviation task forces with BCTs, and we struggle with integration and managing transitions between 24-hour AWT coverage to massing of attack helicopters, or flying 2 and 4 shippers and then managing the transition to a large air assault. We struggle with that stuff. When we go to a larger exercise, a warfighter, we find that our division level staffs are not as adept as we used to be at integration and synchronization of all the things it takes to do deep ops or security zone fight. And so we really got to ask ourselves, what do we mean at each level? And then the second part that Mike talked about, the people. A lot of times I hear people say, well, our young people just don't know, and this is just too hard. And I seem to remember as a heavy div cav squadron XO back in 2004 when the insurgency was blooming, that we just kept saying to ourselves, just give me a force-on-force fight where it's easy and I'll be able to do it. Don't face me with this coin thing. And now we're saying it in reverse. But the good news is we've learned how to work together better, and our young soldiers are adaptive. They scan their environment and they pick up on things, and they're pretty flexible. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I think from an Army perspective, or at least a doctrinal perspective, the thing to keep in mind is it's about readiness. And the question becomes then readiness for what? And over the last 14 years, that readiness has been essentially crew and team level maneuver with battalion and in some cases brigade mission command on top of it. So that's the element that is assessing the risk, managing the crew mix, and employing that team or crew. Well, if you look in the decisive action environment, the two imperatives there, one is wide area security, which arguably is what we've been doing for the last 14 years. The other imperative is combined arms maneuver. And then so then you ask the same question, well, what is readiness in combined arms maneuver? And I would tell you that if you're trying to scale it out in terms of training a unit to do what it is designed to do, or the mission essential tasks for that unit, you're talking then about battalion maneuver and brigade, sometimes division mission command. That is significantly different. And I think that involves a couple of different lines of approach here. One of them is a cultural approach to our leadership, or with our leaders, that, look, it's not good enough that you can conduct a reconnaissance. What's more important is that you can conduct a battalion mission, which is screen, guard, or participate in a cover mission. That's significantly different than the individual skills. That drives you down to the next one, which is the training piece to that. And I think we've kind of got the nut cracked at the individual level. Certainly we produce the best air crews in the world. The challenge becomes collectively. And I think for a lot of years, our company grade, maybe even all the way up through battalion, have not been charged to maneuver and be able to put themselves, the definitional answer to that, of put yourselves in a position of advantage over the enemy. They haven't had the need to do that or create that kind of readiness. I would just kind of conclude with saying that as the Army moves forward with things like standardized metal and objective training levels, it's going to drive a change in the capability that we produce, or the readiness that we produce. And in other words, if you're an attack battalion, you're expected to be able to execute those 5 metal tasks standard that are associated with being an attack battalion. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be all the way up, fully proficient in every one of them to go to Afghanistan. But it's at least leveled the playing field, or laid out a common vocabulary for what is readiness among like units, all the way down to company level.
Thank you, Bob. I'm Ray Davis. I bring the reserve component aspect to this, and I can tell you that the Guard is not any different than what's been described before. We've transitioned from what we used to be to what we are today, where the coin operations are centric teams of 2 is what we really have focused on for the last 15 years, and we're going back to what it used to be. I had the good fortune to have some experience in that. When I was a lieutenant, and I used the description yesterday when I was on the leader development panel, that a typical training day was you would show up and plan for 6 or 7 hours to fly 2, and we transitioned to where we would show up for training, plan for 2 to fly 6, and we have to get what else is left in our kit bag back out and work toward the total package, decisive action operations. Another challenge that is specific to the Guard is how we station our forces, and that's one thing that in my job has my attention, that we need to set ourselves up for success in the future and not have our current state where we're scattered all over the country. We have 12 combat aviation brigades and expeditionary brigades as they're transitioning to that. On average, they're in 15 different states. I think the most is 22. So we've set them up where they can never train collectively. The subordinate battalions are in different locations, and the brigades, they meet when they arrive at the mobilization station. That's just wrong. We got to do better than that. And we're analyzing this now. We're doing the staff work in my office, where We think we can get after this and solve probably 2/3 of it without moving a helicopter or a person. And that's going to be huge as we move toward Objective T and applying that criteria. And I agree with Bob. It's going to change our focus. It's going to change the way we do business. And I'm sure you're all aware we just had a commission report and the recommendation of retaining age 64s in the Army Guard. And if that recommendation holds, we'll keep 4. And it's absolutely vital that we put them in the right location and we set them up for success by not spreading them out as well. And I'm focused on that in my job. And we also can't lose sight of our maintenance and sustainment, because we're only as good as the next turn in the FARP. And when we are setting our training plans and our missions, that has to be a vital part of it. It can't be an afterthought. When we come back to the decisive action fight, as more of a focus on the basics at first, the flying, the fixing. We want the blocking and tackling before we start working on our trick plays. Knocking the dust off our SOPs, night FARP operations. I can't remember the last time I've heard a unit talk about conducting inadvertent IMC 8-ship breakup. And it's easy to brief, but it's hard to do. And those are the things that we're going to have to get after. We need to do all these things while seeking out opportunities that add the realism and complexity to the training that we don't have to simulate. And we're looking after the opportunities that come with someone else's money. These joint exercises, the multi-service exercises that will enable us to get to where we need to be. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. Brian Shivers, JRTC. I'm convinced that I'm last, but I'm a lieutenant colonel and there are colonels, that's 1. 2, the criticality that OCs have, I know they didn't want to hear that from me, so they put me at the end. So I could truly go on and you would hear a JRTC AAR. And for those of you who've sat in, I don't want to do that. So, really, I think the conundrum that we are in and that I see at JRTC is we are trying to train and win the current war while looking forward and thinking about decisive action. And every one of the task force that has come through JRTC, some element of them has actually gone out and gone back to Afghanistan and Iraq. So it's a real issue with how do we fight and the different tactics we use there. So I see that as something natural that we just have to kind of get around. And obviously we're surrounded by tons of capability here, but I won't talk about that in this brief introduction, because it's generally not the equipment that we're having issues with out at JRTC or NTC. It's a lack of training at both the, as it was already stated, individual but mostly collective level. And so it's a training component that I'll approach it from, and it's the quality reps that we lack that I see that come out in spades or not at JRTC that I think that we could be doing better job at home station. Some of those areas specific to the training is the operational planning. We want to be seen as a maneuver force. We have to act and fight like a maneuver force. That comes with the knowledge first and foremost. And when our leaders have that at the aviation level, then we can get at the table of the BCT, get into that operational planning from a plan, prepare, execute, and assess, and then fight and maneuver the way they need us to. So until we have the knowledge and can integrate ourselves into that, I don't know that we're effectively seen as a maneuver force. Polling units that come through the JRTC, I think it's funny how they categorize field time. They'll tell me we've been in the field over a month, 6 weeks. And you boil it down to in the dirt off of prime power, and you're probably getting less than 2 weeks. A gunnery, very, very specific of what we're doing. In the field, yes, but we're not getting after the kind of the hard stuff, the collective stuff that we need to. So I think our definition of what a field problem is really needs to kind of be relooked. So when we do go out and get after some of the field craft, we're actually having quality and making use of that very valuable time. It was already stated by, I think, Colonel Taylor there, it's the collective maneuver that we're really deficient in. the reconnaissance and security, the attack piece, and the assault, not at the teams of two, but at a large scale BCT minus assault and or company minus attack and or a teams of three reconnaissance mission, and being able to do so at where one, we're utilizing the terrain to mitigate the surface-to-air threat that's out there. Just point of fact, we've had 2 incidents where we've hit trees in the last couple of rotations because we're not comfortable operating at that 25, 50 feet level. And we don't do that at home station. We're relegated to 200-300 feet on reservations, and so I think that's some risk we have to kind of get down to mitigate that. And MUM-T was talked about from a reporter down here. We're not leveraging that to the capability we need to, because that 64 really is not built to see out 2Ks. It's much more likely to see out 8Ks and further, and we're not leveraging that. So it's a training component to maneuver large-scale forces to close with and destroy or rapidly build combat power. And the synchronization piece was brought up, and I think it's as Colonel Hertzendorf said, at that company and battalion level, but much more where Colonel Alt said, as you see to that. Too oftentimes we see it's a battalion mission given to insert a battalion, and the BCT is not going to mission command it. They give that to somebody else. So appreciate the opportunity to answer questions.
Have any questions for these great leaders in terms of decisive action, sir?
Gentlemen, I enjoyed your talk. You've all brought up a bunch of things that I've been thinking about for about the last 15 years since I've been playing around with your great service. They go into the following kind of buckets, and I don't know how to resolve them. Sir, you on the end are dealing with what I grew up with, which was the Cold War and the Russians coming through the Fulda Gap. My last boss, who was Army Lieutenant Colonel, commanded a Cav troop over there, and he regaled me with stories of loans lying on the border. The 160th tends to go off, who I had the privilege of being around for about 2.5 years, and these little small groups, they pack up and they go in the back of their airplane and they're gone, and they come back 6 weeks later. But they fall on, typically, one of y'all's places where they get their sustainment and ground support, typically. Then we've got the Cav guys going around doing a job with these little 2 ships running around, but yet you're still wanting to take them to the JRTC and whatnot and use them in these large maneuver formations. They're not doing that anymore, and which goes right back to the end again. You're having to go back from a coin operation to the Fulda Gap routine all over again. Having said all that, and going to now to the TRADOC point of this whole thing, I've got some observations that I won't bring out because I'm kind of prejudiced about them, but I want to get a little bit lower. I want to go down to the complete organization of the Army at the battalion level for aviation. And what I saw over 15 years of playing around and watching various organizations deal at that, I saw a history, I'm trying to be very sensitive about this, a history of what I observed as an outsider, never having seen you operate before, as a considerable inefficiencies that probably don't need to be there. And I saw it happen in my lifetime where we had time and no material, so we made up things to do for our people that we had sitting around. And it stuck, and we never got rid of it until somebody finally kicked over the table. So I will leave you with my thoughts I had on that. Who is going to kick over the table in Army aviation, or does it need to be, or maybe just tip over the footstool? I don't know, but I'm wondering, are y'all asking the question down to that level? I'm really talking about table of organization and equipment, the whole bit at that level. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think your question is emblematic of the question being asked throughout the Army right now. As we do have the Army writ large, maybe not aviation branch, but the Army has a chance right now to just kind of catch its breath and say, okay, what are we here for? And that question becomes to fight and win the nation's wars. Okay, what if they don't look like the wars of the last 14, 15 years? Well, then we need the ability to be able to defeat a peer competitor. And so as we start to, the new Chief of Staff of the Army has said readiness is number 1. There's no number 2. And that idea is permeating through the force. And so you see commanders asking hard questions about, well, why am I doing X if X doesn't produce readiness for us down the road? I think the dichotomy we have is that the Army is seriously focused about defeating that peer competitor under combined arms maneuver. In decisive action, I should say, because the decisive action construct has combined arms maneuver and wide area security just being done as essentials throughout that. If that's the case, that's where the majority of the Army is going. Aviation finds itself having to engage at the mission command level combined arms maneuver. I know when I was a cab commander, we sent elements to work with the MCE at 4th ID in Germany, ideally, working in a combined arms maneuver mindset against serious competitors out there. But at the same time, I've got forces that we're getting ready to send to Afghanistan who are going to operate in wide area security. So I don't think that ever goes away. To the crux of what you asked, I think because of that, we don't have time to do things that don't produce readiness, or we shouldn't be doing things that don't produce readiness. It's a big system, having said that, though. And big systems have slop in the machines and have inefficiencies and bureaucracies built in them. I hope that answers, or at least gets close to what you're trying to ask. Are we looking at TO and E's? I think we are, but I think what's driving us is you take, it's not a question of what do we want to have, it's a question of what can you afford to have at this point, whether those are flying hours or manpower.
Well, I'll get down to the small bucket level.
Sure.
Exactly, for example, I'll throw one out there that I got told. I probably got the wrong name for it. Somebody's got to change the name every 3 months anyway to get a brownie point on their fitness report. Soldier time.
Right.
Those basic training skills that I was watching take place before a battalion over in Fort Campbell deployed. I saw guys in blue DynCorp suits fixing their helicopters, and they were out pitching tents on the side of the hangar.
Right.
And when I asked the captain, who was on her knees counting screwdrivers out of a toolkit because she's getting a change of command next week, what were they doing out there? Because I didn't know. And she says, it's soldier time. And when I go in to ask a bunch of NCOs, because that's who I normally go and ask, I got some more stories about that.
Right.
But that's a very narrow topic I'm talking about, but that's what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Do you kick over the table at the battalion level and take a look at what you do? And as you said very eloquently, does that produce readiness? And readiness for what?
Yeah. No, you're right. I think, to use, you're talking about maintenance there, and whether they're done by contractors or civilians. At the leader development panel, this Sergeant Major Chambers brought up a really, just spot on point about every time we have to work to maintain the ability to keep that skill set, that maintenance skill set in our crew chiefs and our enlisted ranks. We just have to. There's a place and a time and a place for the contract maintenance, absolutely, but the problem's become over the last 14 years, you've separated the maintainer from their maintenance, and now that's a skill set we can't maintain. Well, that manifests itself back at home station, and I think these guys could tell you, certainly we had to deal with, if it's a decision of do I take that young soldier away from the helicopter to go paint rocks, or do I keep him on there working on maintenance, development readiness? That's a no-brainer for most of us. I think the answer to your question, the large paintbrush answer would be, I think at a unit level, we're having to kick over the table, so to speak, because we just don't have time not to. You don't have time to, and in some places there is, mandated days off and schedules and all that kind of stuff that drives you to do different things. But I think just about everybody here will tell you we fly on the weekends 24/7, and show me any other force in a division or a camp post or station that runs at a 40% readiness rate, or that drives 40% of their fleet for 6 to 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's kind of the op tempo that aviation units run on. When you're doing that, you can't afford to say, okay, well, we're gonna take sergeant's time and do something other than build readiness at an individual level or a unit level level. But I think I might be better off deferring to these guys over here.
Well, I think we have to. I think you're right, sir. We have to train maintenance, and we've done that quite a bit, over the last 2 years. At Fort Drum, for instance, we're pretty much weaned off contract maintenance. We're running all green suit phase lanes for all our MDSs. So we're training maintenance. We still have to train some of those skills you were talking about in soldier time, because one of our weaknesses when we get over here to JRTC or to go into an austere environment and operate is we can't do it. We don't know. I had a battalion commander and sergeant major have to stop their first field problem, and the two of them demonstrate how to get the assembly area set up, just the tents. Just demonstrate how to set tents up. And the aha moment for the squadron commander was when he jokingly said over his soldier to the sergeant first class, And that's how it's done, right, Sergeant? And the sergeant said, sir, I've never set a tent up in my life. And he's a platoon sergeant. And so we still have to split. We have to train maintenance because fixing and flying is what we do, but we've got some basic soldier skills we still got to focus on as well.
Can I add one more, just the reserve component, aspect to that as well? I agree with you. We've conditioned ourselves to use contractors as our first source to fix a problem, but we can't afford that anymore. But in the reserve component in the Guard, we've less likely to go that route, but it does happen way more than I'm comfortable with in my position. But we got to get away from that to see every maintenance opportunity as a training opportunity. And if we pass that phase over to a contract team, then we've given up that opportunity to make our unit better.
Hey, sir, I would argue, I think what you're talking about to a degree is the R4 Gen model where we outsourced our training. We said, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to lockstep go to maybe not a field problem, but we'll go to a off-post training event, we'll go to a CTC, we'll go to an ATX, and then we'll deploy. And that worked as we were trying to maximize throughput for a coin fight. And then when we came back, because we've been doing this for 14 years, we were much more apt to say, okay, I'm gonna honor the soldier time, the family time. And we're probably growing out of that. And I think there's a time where we have to do that and not so much worry about a Friday off or a Friday where we're not going to fly a 64 because if they go down, we can't maintain them. You train because we need to get to the readiness, and then you maintain. It might be that Friday night. And then so we have to convince troopers that that's good, and we got to convince families that that's good too, because that's not what we've been doing. And that's going to be a hard sell, all in the name of readiness and being effective.
What other questions do you have for these leaders? They want me to pull the plug, but I'm just going to ask you one more time. I'm just going to. So Mike, you hit on a lot of this, but from the industry standpoint, is they're looking in it at the operational level. Are there any capabilities that you are missing, or would perhaps help enable you all to do those things that you just simply can't do? I mean, you can't make a day 48 hours to do all this. Yes, this is a leader development and time management and a challenge, but are there any things that you would say that you just simply don't have, or that could be enhanced capability-wise to help you get at the different aspects you talked about? And that's a question for anything in terms of whether it's simulations, whether it's maintenance training tools, whether it's those type of things that would help in terms of on the economy piece of this discussion.
Yes, sir. So I'll hit simulations after. So let me talk before that. I guess first off has to be the capabilities of the platforms, and General Gaylor was talking about that. We need the platforms, to be capable, the hot ability to maintain them. That's sort of the mission critical. The way we look at it. The capabilities of platforms, absolutely first, and then I think there's probably mission essential and mission enhancing kinds of capabilities. Mission essential, probably going to be things for the aircraft survivability equipment that are going to be out there to be able to detect and defeat future threats, and I think we're absolutely needing those. And then into the mission enhancing will be the things that really give us that comparative advantage, degraded visual environment, and those things that allow us to really get after the enemy in all environments. And I think we're progressing very well in those. NVGs still own us tonight, and I think that's very important. If you look at the fight that went in Russia, Ukraine didn't do very well. They flew largely during the day, and so I think the night still gives us a great element of surprise. I think to capitalize on that will be the ability to fight in the environments, and then probably even further down the road will be the ability to really fight through all parts of the spectrum that we need to be able to. So I think, if you think of capabilities in those sort of three areas, platforms, mission critical, mission essential with probably aircraft survivability, and then mission enhancing. Simulators is interesting, at least from our perspective. What I think we need to do with our simulators is get them in front of our aircraft. Now, at least I can speak from my lens with the 160th. We have great simulators, but they're lagging behind our aircraft, and we're largely using them for qualification training, which is great. But if we look at some of these future capabilities that may be very boutique, expensive, niche, we're not going to field them for entire fleets. They're going to be expensive, they're going to be heavy, and we're probably only going to, or maybe only need to be able to put them on that aircraft when we need that specific capability, but we're going to need to train it in the simulator because we're not going to be training it in the airplane. So I think our simulators need to be in front of our aircraft, test capabilities on our simulators before we employ them on our aircraft, and then even take that one step further with these rapidly advancing enemy threat systems to be able to somehow model them very accurately into our simulators so that we can really work on TTPs, work on capabilities in our simulation before we have to field a system based on some requirements that we think are going to be needed. So, long answer to the question there, and I'll turn it over, I think, Mac.
Yeah, the one capability I would say is not aircraft related, but it is comms related. So, in my own division, 3 BCTs, 3 different capability sets for comms, of which the cab has 0. So that's something we got to fix as an Army, is we got to re-baseline comms, figure out how we can all be on the same wavelength, so to speak.
Hey, sir, if I may, on that piece, I sat down with Lieutenant General Williams. I think he's the Army sustainment individual, and he was asking to the point of Colonel McCurry, why does the Army lag behind on not just mission commands but digital systems in general? And I use the Marines as an example. Is when they talk about the air-ground team, they talk about that entire team. And aviation is a part of that. Whereas aviation, here we are in the Army, and we have JCR now, for example, and the rest of our systems are best case BFT2. And they lack significant capabilities with respect to situational awareness and understanding from a BCT maneuver through the aviation component there. But I don't think we're looking at it holistically. And so as a mission command, we absolutely lag behind. The stuff we do have is not as compatible, and they continue to upgrade. Every BCT comes through. The 82nd comes with something different. The 1AD comes with something to every BCT, and every aviation battalion has a problem with our, frankly, archaic ARC 201s that have to unwrap a wrapped code, for example, and talk. And it can take us anywhere from 2 to 4 days to actually be able to support a ground unit effectively. So absolutely, sir, communications piece, we're behind.
I would, not necessarily tech related, but I would say that the observation from the catbird seat here is that we have to produce leaders that know how to train at the collective level. It's not good enough to be able to say, to turn the training over to the IPs and say, okay, you guys produce me my readiness. If you're talking about standard metal and you're talking about objective ratings for readiness, that goes above crew and team level. So we're talking about company commanders and platoon leaders knowing how to train their unit. And you're talking about battalion and company commanders knowing how to certify that training. And that's an integrated effort that's from individual up through collective. And I think we've kind of been getting by the last 14 years because you produce the individual or crew level, and we do some C2 type events where we prove we can move digits around at a battalion level or brigade level, and then we go put it together downrange. Now you have to be able to have that brigade or battalion level mission command that entire formation underneath them, and that's significantly different. That's only going to happen when the leaders know how to train that to those standards.
Sir, I think the synchronization has to come to with a ground element. We can all make time on target when I don't have anybody in back of an aircraft, or I can put fires effects somewhere and nobody's there grading. And so until we synchronize at the company and battalion level with a supported BCT or battalion, we're not going to get any better than average. And I think we have to do that.
Yeah, I would also add that the decisive, if you're going to fight in in the decisive action environment, which clearly we've been told we are, you're also talking about division maneuver and a division in the offense. And that is significantly different because all those processes you're talking about at BCT level are are much more anemic right now at the division level. The ability to synchronize those fires and maneuver, specifically aviation maneuver, that's a challenge.
So, and I'll add to that, and I'll put my old G3 hat on. As I sat as a G3 in combat, that piece there was very difficult because for so many years at the division level, we just let the brigades just go do what they did. They had their battle space, they had their spheres of influence, they had their mission, and the division just kind of sat back and just made sure they had resources, made sure things like that. But now as we go in and we start having to synchronize at the division level and prioritize, and so that's really the key thing, because as you look at some of the assets that we have now that allow the aviation missions and operations to be so successful really are in the ISR world, and that's what really gives us the great advantage in our decision making, is the ability to be so well informed of the enemy situation, and then being able to take that, put it together and prioritize it and give it down to the right, and be able to make sure the aviation brigade or the task force and the BCT are synchronized. And then what we see in Korea specifically is now the division has a responsibility to shape the fight before the BCT and the aviation brigade get into the fight. And that piece of understanding what's the division fight, what's the brigade fight, and what's the battalion fight is a part now where you've got the commanding general, the DCGs, all part of that now, making decisions and looking at time and synchronizing of, okay, we at the division will use all the ISR and the fires to shape the fight till this point, and then now the BCT commander has that fight, and so forth and so on. So I think that's one thing also, as you look at decisive action operations, it's how do we now make sure that the aviation brigade, the BCT, the division are all synchronized together.
And that drives you down the road to who is the chief of reconnaissance. And if the cab is uniquely positioned to be able to do that, and without that kind of mindset of, hey, give me missions, don't give me tasks, you end up running a rental fleet for unmanned assets or anything else.
I'd like to take it back to the equipping piece for just a moment. We talk about decisive action operations. One component of that is defense support to civilian authorities, and the equipping piece of that for our aircraft is an afterthought. One thing that we require when we're supporting, for example, forest fires, if we're supporting U.S. Forest Service, is civil band radios. And that is an afterthought. We have to go through the AWR process to add that equipment into the aircraft. And it's not a defense industry steps up and they meet our needs. They do that quite well. But what we need to get after is the acquisition process and add that in at the beginning when we're designing the aircraft to be able to fit those components and meet the needs for all of the decisive action operations, not just the warfight piece.
Any other questions for this great team here? Well, look, on behalf of myself and Quad A, I want to thank you great leaders for all of your leadership, for your selfless service, and for taking care of our force. You'll see all of them again at some point in Army aviation influencing something positively, but thank you very much. And for all of you out there, they'll be available for a few minutes if you have any other questions, but thanks for all you do, and thanks for taking care of Army aviation, its soldiers and families. Appreciate it very much. Thanks.